Shirley here. The past year has brought unprecedented regulatory changes for small GovCons. Executive orders are driving updates across the FAR, DFARS, SBA programs, the 2026 budget narrative, and the NDAA. And these changes are continuing to happen. Today we're discussing the changes and the public policies driving these, and most likely additional changes down the road. My goal is to help small businesses understand the new rules of the game, pivot to meet market demands, and to grow their businesses over the next 3 years. My special guest today to help me with this important topic is Sam Lee, managing member of the Sam Lee Law Firm. Welcome, Sam. Can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Thanks so much, Shirley. I really appreciate you having me on the show. My name is Sam Lee. I'm the managing member of Sam Lee Law, which is a law firm in Fairfax, Virginia. My firm is dedicated to helping small businesses. I was previously the policy director at SBA, and while I was there, I worked on small business government contracting. I helped push small business government contracting to a 50% increase, reaching $180 billion a year. And because of that work, I was named America's Small Business Champion. My current work involves primarily government contracting. I work with small businesses to maintain compliance with the SBA regulations, handle protests, work on their certification status, review corporate transactions. I'm also an author at GovCon Intelligence, which is a newsletter that reaches about 2,000 businesses and business owners every week. We cover FAR topics, regulatory updates, and I've also started my own podcast as well. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your successful show.
Thank you, Sam. It's such a pleasure to have you here today. Let's start with the SBA and some of the policies and practices that have changed over the past year.
That's a great place to start. There have been a lot of policies and practices that have changed in the past year with the arrival of the new administration and Administrator Kelly Loeffler. A lot of the changes have been in the 8A program. Historically, the 8A program is SBA's flagship contracting program. It's been in place since the late 1960s, and the new administration has made a multitude of changes really to diminish the program. It started even before the new administration came in. There was a court case in 2023 called the Ultima decision that eliminated the presumption of racial preference in the program. And because of that, all participants, and that includes white men, can establish eligibility for the program. But when the new administrator came in, she had a priority to make significant changes to the 8A program. So on day one of her term, she announced that SBA was reducing the goal for working with so-called small disadvantaged businesses, and that includes 8A businesses. That's a government-wide goal. Under the prior administration, it had reached 15% of all federal contracting dollars, and the SBA reduced that to 5% starting in fiscal year 2025. Then, as the year went on, SBA continued to tighten the screws on 8A participants. They announced a full-scale audit of the 8A program and indeed sent letters to all 4,300 8A participants in December to seek financial documentation and other documents under what they called a data call that was due in mid-January. And when January rolled around, SBA started taking action on that data call. They suspended over 1,000 firms, 1,091 firms to be exact, starting in January. That's about 25% of the program. Those firms, SBA said, did not meet the January 19th deadline for the data call. And in fact, we're recording this now February 13th, and SBA has moved to suspend even more firms. They suspended an additional 200 or so firms earlier this week for non-compliance. There's a requirement in the 8A program to stay economically disadvantaged, and SBA determined internally that a few hundred firms, mostly those in the D.C. area, had not complied with that requirement to remain economically disadvantaged. At the same time, in the 8A program, we're seeing a shift in resources. SBA had announced a shift from supporting 8A processing to more so supporting veteran-owned processing that came out on Veterans Day. And I found on my website, GovCon Intelligence, that in fact SBA has not approved a new 8A firm since August of last year. So a lot of the action is in the 8A program. I'm looking forward to talking more about policy changes and developments elsewhere with you.
Thank you, Sam. I understand there is what is being called the M&A cliff for small businesses. Can you explain that?
I'd be happy to. The M&A cliff actually dates back to when I was at SBA. I left SBA in the middle of 2025, and while I was still there, SBA announced that it was changing the merger and acquisitions rules for small business contracting. But when SBA announced that, SBA said that it was going to delay the operation of that change until January of the following year, which is January of 2026. That date, January 17th, 2026, just passed. That's the M&A cliff. So essentially firms had a full year up until January 17th of 2026 to operate under the old rules versus the new rules that are now in place. The way the cliff works is prior to January 17, 2026, small businesses could get acquired or merge with large businesses and continue to be eligible for certain small business set-aside work, primarily set-aside orders under multiple award contracts. For a lot of small businesses, that was a big deal because they could use that to boost their valuation for merger and acquisition activity. So there were a lot of firms that were pushing to get their transactions finalized before January 17th of this year. That date has come, so any new transactions that take place now are subject to the new rules, which don't allow the small business to continue under its status.
So let's stay with the max and recertification, notwithstanding an M&A transaction. I understand that contracting offices may not require contractors to recertify at the task order level. Is that different than in the past?
Well, Shirley, you've heard one story. There's another story out there. I actually wrote about this on my website, GovCon Intelligence, this week. There's a fascinating dispute right now between the FAR Council and SBA on how recertification works. So the story that you just told, that COs would not require contractors to recertify, is the FAR Council rule in the FAR overhaul. Over the past year or so, the FAR has issued new regulations under this overhaul process. And one of the overhaul regulations is that recertification does not occur at the task order level. Instead, firms get the small business status that they certified under at the contract. The SBA says something else. SBA says there is recertification at the task order level under specific circumstances. It primarily applies when the contract was not set aside and there's a new set aside at the task order level. The point I made in my article is that SBA has developed its recertification over a 20-year period. So SBA has changed that rule gradually over the past 20 years. The FAR overhaul rule, the one that you expressed, is very new. It comes out in September of last year. It's not been tested to see how it operates. It's probably subject to legal scrutiny. So we'll have to see how these differing rules interact with each other in real life as new task orders come out.
So I want to make sure that the audience understands what's at stake here with this issue. If the RFO prevails, that means that small businesses that size out, that have a prime contract, a prime multi-award contract, but they size out, they can continue, as long as they have that master contract, they can continue to compete for task orders as a small business. Even though they're no longer small, they could be a $50 million company, and they would be essentially competing against tiny businesses. Is that right?
That's right. Under the FAR rule, which does not require recertification at the task order level, that business can be above the size standard. It can be essentially a large business when it goes after the task order. The FAR says you have to be small at the time of contract, but not necessarily at the time that you're going after the actual work at the task orders. Over 20 years, SBA recognized that warped competition. So SBA changed the recertification rules to require, in certain circumstances, that firms be small at the time of the set-aside task order. The FAR overhaul has a different rule. It's a different rule. We'll have to see how that works out when it gets to protest, the court, and beyond.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. So, Sam, there have been a number of administrative and programmatic updates over the last year. Can you describe some of those?
Well, primarily the administrative and programmatic updates have come out of the FAR overhaul. The 8A program under the FAR overhaul switches from being primarily a sole source program to being a competition program. FAR overhaul now says that contracting officers should prefer competition when they use 8A. The FAR overhaul also puts the 8A program in parity with small business set-asides and the other socioeconomic programs. There used to be a rule in the SBA regulations called the once 8A, always 8A rule. It's actually still in the SBA regulations. That hasn't changed. But the FAR overhaul doesn't recognize that rule anymore. Now, agencies can switch a contract from 8A to Hub Zone or Service-Able Veteran or Women-Owned without getting a release from the Small Business Administration. There are a number of other changes in the small business section of FAR Part 19, and I'd like to be able to discuss those with you as well.
So, what you were just talking about regarding eliminating, for all intents and purposes, sole source and making 8A competitive with other classifications. It's bad news for 8A companies because that means more competition for them. But on the positive side, there is an advantage to generic small businesses as well as WOSB, HubZone, STVOSB certified companies that they can now compete for what used to be strictly 8A set-aside opportunities, correct?
That's right. That's a huge opportunity for firms that were on the outside looking in at 8A contracts. Agencies can move a contract from 8A to one of the other programs, veteran-owned, hub-zone, or women-owned, without needing to go through SBA.
And that's an important point here, Sam, that we should point out to the audience, and that is the FAR changes are deviations. They are not codified in law. So rulemaking comes next, but as of right now, the date of this recording, these changes have not been codified in law.
That's right. We've never seen anything like this before. No one's ever tried to rewrite the entire FAR through deviation. So even as an attorney, I've been practicing law for 20 years. I was at SBA for 17 years writing procurement policy. I have no idea how this is going to turn out.
I'm sitting on the edge of my seat. So, Sam, let's talk about system migration. Tell me what the SBA is doing there.
Yes, just this year, 2026, SBA is going full steam ahead with its new certification platform. It's called My SBA. It's at certifications.sba.gov. That system got off to a fast start with the 8A data call. That 8A data call was due January 19th. The system became fully operational just that month. So there were thousands and thousands of businesses that went into the new My SBA system to submit their data call information. That created a challenge for many businesses that were submitting their information toward the end of that period.
Now, Sam, I understand that the size standards have also changed. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's right. SBA has a legislative responsibility to review its size standards every 5 years. The current 5-year period is up right now, so SBA is going through all 1,000 of its size standards. In prior years, SBA has done that in smaller batches, maybe a few hundred at a time. But now SBA decided that it's only going to do 2 separate reviews, one of the 500 or so revenue-based size standards and another of the other 500 employee-based size standards. SBA already issued the proposed size standards for the revenue-based size standards. Those are the ones that primarily apply to service companies and construction companies. And then it plans sometime during this year to propose new size standards for the employee-based size standards. Those are the ones that affect manufacturers and IT value-added resellers. Now, the good thing about this time around for SBA's size standard review is SBA has announced that the agency does not want to lower size standards. It's either keeping size standards at the level that they are now or it's increasing them. The reason for that is if SBA were to lower size standards, it would turn a small business to a large business overnight, potentially, and SBA didn't want that to happen.
Oh, that makes sense. We need to take a break. I'm talking to Sam Lee, managing member of the Sam Lee Law Firm. When we come back, we'll talk about changes that Congress has made to the SBA's programs. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Shirley Collier, President and founder of Scale to Market, is your host for this Growth Masters Federal presentation. Scale to Market helps businesses think, plan, collaborate, and build market value by developing and executing customized data-driven business development playbooks, building efficient information systems, and creating high-performing BD teams. Utilizing the proprietary Davy Business Development Growth Framework, Scale to Market partners with business owners and executives to increase their company's value by achieving profitable and sustainable growth in the federal marketplace. Email Shirley at scollier@scaletomarket.com to learn more about the Davy Growth Framework and how it can be instrumental in helping grow your federal contracting business. Back now to Shirley's conversation with Sam Lee, managing member of the Sam Lee Law Firm, as they discuss recent changes in the FAR and procurement policy that impact the SBA and small GovCons.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about size standards. Sam, the socioeconomic certification programs are codified in law. Has Congress made any changes to these programs?
Sure. For the most part, Congress has not changed those programs recently. The most recent change was an increase to the goal for service-disabled veteran-owned firms. The goal used to be 3% of all federal contracting, and that increased to 5% starting last fiscal year 2024. One very impactful change, though, has been the change from 2020, which allowed for higher-level sole source contracts to entity-owned 8A firms. Those are the firms that are owned by Alaska Native corporations, Indian tribes, and Native Hawaiian organizations. That increase to $100 million has really benefited those entity-owned 8A firms. They can receive sole source contracts at much higher levels, and I've watched the value of 8A contracts increase to those entity-owned firms since that 2020 change.
Sam, there have been accusations of fraud, waste, and abuse in the 8A program. For those who are not familiar with the program, can you tell us a little about the process to become certified and the oversight of the program?
Yes, there have been accusations of fraud, waste, and abuse, and on my website, I tried to look for that fraud, waste, and abuse. I did not find nearly as much as what the administration has said. There have been accusations of up to $500 million, but in fact, I found something more like $22,000 in the particular situation that they were discussing. The process to become certified in the 8A program can be long and laborious, and at this point, because SBA seems not to be approving firms, it can be all for naught. The SBA recently announced some changes to the way that 8A firms are certified. Primarily, their requirements to be 8A certified are to be owned and controlled by U.S. citizens that are socially and economically disadvantaged. The social disadvantage element requires that the individual show that they've suffered discrimination in some respect in one of what I call the 3 E's. That's employment, education, and entrepreneurship. So the individual has to show that they've suffered this discrimination. It used to be, prior to the Ultima decision in 2023, that SBA would apply a presumption for members of minority groups. That's not the case anymore. So now SBA requires that the applicant fill out a narrative to show how that discrimination occurred. That narrative is what is changing. SBA announced in January that it was changing the process for the narrative, it was changing its regulations, and it's changing the review process, primarily to allow victims of reverse discrimination to apply and seek admission to the program. The other part of the disadvantage requirement is economic disadvantage. That's come under particular scrutiny just in the last week. Economic disadvantage is much more objective. It's more objective than saying whether or not you suffer discrimination. Under economic disadvantage, the applicant has to show that they comply with all three economic disadvantage caps in the SBA program. There's one for income, there's one for net worth, and there's one for assets. And it doesn't just stop with the application. Firms that are in the program have to continue to comply with those economic disadvantage caps. The caps are complex, there are exceptions to all of them. They rely on tax information plus accounting information. So SBA combines data points from the tax returns as well as financial statements. And the economic disadvantage review is what resulted in SBA proposing the termination of over 150 8A businesses earlier this week. Firms that are thinking about applying to the 8A program may have to wait a bit. I found in my data that, first of all, over the course of 2025, there are only about 60 firms that were approved into the program as compared to hundreds the year before. And in fact, there has not been a single 8A firm that has been approved since August 15th, 2025. So the trend is more SBA trying to push firms out of the program through suspensions, terminations, rather than admitting new firms into the program under the application process.
Now, Sam, there's been this perception that there has never been oversight of the program. Is this true?
Absolutely not. There's no program that SBA runs that has more oversight than the 8A program. Once you're in the 8A program, you have to continuously report to SBA. There's an annual review. Companies that have gone through the annual review know how hard it can be. There's a lot of documentation you have to submit to the local SBA office for that office to look through and review your economic disadvantage and your compliance with SBA rules. There's also requirements on 8A contracts, and every 8A contract has to go through SBA for a review. That's different from other types of small business contracts. A serviceable veteran contract doesn't have to go to SBA for review. HubZone doesn't have to go to SBA, but the 8A contract has to go through SBA for a review. Then at the contracting agency level, the contracting agency reviews the compliance of the 8A contractor with special small business rules. So there's a lot of oversight in the 8A program. SBA does some of it. Contracting agencies do some of it. Being compliant is really important to staying in the program.
Let's switch topics here and talk about the RFO a little bit more. The RFO made changes to FAR Part 19 on how agencies procure products and services from small businesses. And you mentioned a couple of them, but can you summarize those changes?
Certainly. The biggest event from the RFO was actually a non-change, in fact. The RFO kept the rule of two. There was some speculation that the FAR Council might remove the rule of two because it's not based in legislative law, but fortunate for small businesses out there, the FAR Council decided to keep the rule of two. The rule of two is the rule that says agencies must set aside a contract if there are two or more small businesses that can perform that contract at a fair market price. That rule has been the bedrock of small business contracting since the early 80s. It's the basis that SBA uses to push agencies to increase contracting with small businesses, and it stays in the FAR. The primary purpose and the North Star behind the FAR overhaul was to simplify the FAR and reduce the amount of regulation. To that end, the FAR overhaul cut down the number of pages in the FAR by about 20%. The other big change in the FAR is the emphasis on commercial purchasing. A lot of the material that used to be in Part 13 on simplified acquisition procedures into Part 12 on commercial. It's now a requirement that agencies use the Part 12 simplified procedures for commercial purchases under the threshold of $7.5 million. The idea there is to get agencies to move faster, to go through competitions more quickly, and to get as fast as possible from competition to award. This is going to be a big benefit to small businesses that already are in the commercial space and used to those processes and looking for something similar in government contracting.
I agree with that, Sam. I've been telling my clients the same thing. This is good news for small businesses. And the government's definition of commercial items or commercial products are really anything that can be sold into the commercial market. So it includes IT, accounting, legal, construction. It's a wide variety of industries, many of whom are my clients. So there's going to be more rapid procurement under the simplified acquisition procedures than under the small business set-aside program, is my analysis.
I think that's right. And there was a slight increase in the simplified acquisition threshold as well during this fiscal year because of inflation adjustments. The FAR increased the simplified acquisition threshold to $350,000.
Yes, absolutely. In summary, the focus of the SBA has changed over the last year. Rather than increasing the number of small contractors and the percentage of awards that go to small businesses, especially socioeconomically disadvantaged businesses, those numbers have declined and will continue to do so. The accusations of fraud, waste, and abuse in SBA programs have largely not been proven as of this date. We all want fraud, waste, and abuse to be eliminated throughout the government. But let's make sure we are targeting the greatest offenders. No one expects this scrutiny of the SBA, its programs, and the businesses it certifies to let up anytime soon. So what are small businesses to do? I have been advising my clients to sharpen their strategies, products, and services, teaming relationships, and their business and marketing skills in preparation for competing against other small businesses, both inside and outside of the certification programs, and for competing against large businesses. This is the good news. Simplified acquisition procedures allow contracting offices to award non-compete contracts to businesses of all sizes. The SAT, the Simplified Acquisition Threshold, has increased to $9 million, $9.5 million for DoD, and there is potentially less competition outside of the small business set-aside program. And small businesses are innovative, flexible, and savvy. They can compete and win against larger companies. The government is emphasizing capabilities, not capacity. The federal government has also put a premium on innovation and is allowing contracting officers more leeway to rapidly acquire commercial products: IT, legal, accounting, marketing, training, repair, construction, etc. They can then evaluate those offerings and award follow-on contracts to customize them to meet the government's needs. Several new or enhanced programs, including Project Spectrum, the Defense Innovation Unit, Software Acquisition Pathway, the National Security and Defense Artificial Intelligence Institute, the Apex Accelerator's Centers of Excellence, and Advanced Manufacturing Working Groups provide pathways, partnerships, and funding to accelerate the government's use of emerging technologies. Small businesses can participate in all of these programs. I have summarized some of these programs and ways in which the government is reducing procurement regulations in my Substack. I will put a link in the show notes. Sam, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with our audience today.
Thank you, Shirley, for having me on. It's been my pleasure.
It's been my pleasure as well to have this conversation with you, Sam. Folks, if you'd like to get in touch with Sam, he can be reached at sl@samleadlaw.com, or you can reach out to us here at Scale to Market, and we'll make sure you're connected. This is Shirley Collier, President of Scale to Market, host of the Growth Masters Federal Podcast, and publisher of the Small Businesses Equal Federal Innovation Substack, signing off for now. As we close, I want to thank you for joining us today and encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn and visit our website, that's scaletomarket.com with the number 2 in the middle, where you will find a link to our webcast on the Scale to Market YouTube channel, along with our Growth Masters Federal podcast, white papers, my blog, and other links and resources. While there, please leave us a comment or suggestion so we can stay focused on what's important to you. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.